Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the intricacies of the past, unraveling the threads that weave together the tapestry of human experience. Today, we embark on a journey to explore one of the most pivotal and devastating events in Russian history, the Russian famine of 1891 to 1892. This calamitous period, which ravaged the lives of millions, is a testament to the complex interplay between nature, politics, and society. The reign of Alexander III, who ruled from 1881 until his death in 1894, was characterized by a series of policies aimed at modernizing and consolidating the empire's power. However, these efforts were often hampered by the entrenched feudal system, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and the empire's sheer geographical vastness. In the years preceding the famine, Russia experienced a period of rapid population growth, which put increasing pressure on the country's agricultural resources. The peasants, who made up the bulk of the population, were bound to the land through a system of serfdom that had only been officially abolished in 1861. Despite this emancipation, many peasants continued to live in conditions of poverty and dependence, with limited access to education, healthcare, or economic opportunities. The agricultural sector, which was the backbone of the Russian economy, was particularly vulnerable to fluctuations in climate and weather patterns. The country's grain production, which was primarily based on wheat, rye, and oats, was often susceptible to crop failures due to droughts, floods, or extreme temperatures. In the late 1880s, a series of poor harvests had already led to localized famines and food shortages in various parts of the empire. As we approach the fateful year of 1891, we find Russia's agricultural sector facing a perfect storm of challenges. A severe drought had struck the Volga region, one of the country's most fertile and productive areas, leading to widespread crop failures and a significant decline in grain production. The effects of this drought were exacerbated by a series of policy decisions made by the Russian government, which had imposed strict export controls on grain in an attempt to protect domestic supplies. Meanwhile, the Russian peasantry was facing its own set of challenges. Many peasants were struggling to survive on small plots of land with limited access to credit, technology, or other resources that could help them improve their agricultural productivity. The system of communal land ownership, known as the mir, which had been introduced in the aftermath of emancipation, often led to inefficient farming practices and a lack of individual initiative. The warning signs were already apparent. Food prices were rising, grain stores were depleted, and the peasantry was growing increasingly desperate. In the midst of this unfolding crisis, a complex interplay of natural and human factors would ultimately lead to a catastrophe that would claim millions of lives and leave an indelible mark on the course of Russian history. In the spring of 1891, as the snow began to thaw and the earth slowly came back to life, the first whispers of famine began to spread across the Russian countryside. It was a time of great uncertainty and fear, as peasants and officials alike struggled to comprehend the enormity of the disaster that was unfolding before their eyes. The once mighty Volga River, which had long been the lifeblood of Russian agriculture, now seemed to be withholding its bounty, leaving behind a trail of withered crops and empty granaries. As the spring of 1891 gave way to summer, the famine's grip on Russia tightened. The Volga region, once the empire's breadbasket, was now a desolate expanse of withered fields and empty villages. In June 1891, the Russian government, belatedly recognizing the gravity of the situation, appointed a special commission to oversee relief efforts. Led by Count Sergei Witte, the commission faced a daunting task: to distribute what little grain was available to the millions of starving peasants. The summer months were particularly brutal, as temperatures soared and crops withered in the parched earth. In July 1891, reports began to emerge of peasants eating grasses, roots, and even tree bark to survive. The situation was especially dire in the provinces of Samara, Saratov, and Simbirsk, where entire villages were on the brink of collapse. As one observer noted, "The people are so weakened by hunger that they can hardly move, and their bodies are covered with ulcers and sores." In August 1891, the Russian government authorized the importation of grain from abroad, but the measures came too late to alleviate the suffering of the previous winter. The imported grain was also often of poor quality, and its distribution was hindered by the empire's inadequate transportation infrastructure. As a result, Many peasants continued to starve, their bodies weakened by months of malnutrition. The autumn of 1891 brought little relief, as the harvest was once again meager. In October 1891, the Russian Orthodox Church, in a rare display of defiance against the government, issued a statement condemning the authorities' handling of the famine and calling for greater aid to be provided to the afflicted regions. The Church's intervention highlighted the growing discontent among the population, as many began to question the government's ability to respond to the crisis. As winter approached, the situation grew increasingly desperate. In December 1891, reports emerged of peasants freezing to death in their homes, unable to afford fuel or warmth. The streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg were filled with beggars, many of whom had been forced to flee their villages in search of food. The once mighty Russian Empire seemed on the brink of collapse, its people reduced to a state of utter destitution. In the midst of this chaos, a young doctor named Zhukovsky traveled to the famine-stricken regions, bearing witness to the unimaginable suffering of the peasantry. He wrote of seeing children with sunken eyes and swollen bellies, their skin hanging loose from their bones like rags on a skeleton. His accounts, published in the Russian press, helped to galvanize public opinion against the government's handling of the famine. As 1892 dawned, the famine showed no signs of abating. In January 1892, the Russian government was forced to declare a state of emergency, dispatching troops to maintain order in the affected regions. The measures were too little, too late, however, and the famine continued to rage on, claiming thousands of lives each month. The consequences of this disaster would be felt for years to come, as Russia struggled to recover from one of the most devastating famines in its history. In February 1892, a group of Russian intellectuals, including the writer Leo Tolstoy, launched a private relief effort, collecting donations and distributing aid to the afflicted regions. Their efforts were a testament to the resilience and compassion of the Russian people, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. As Tolstoy himself wrote, "The famine is not just a natural disaster, but a moral one, a consequence of our own indifference and neglect." His words would resonate throughout Russia as the nation struggled to come to terms with the enormity of its failure to protect its most vulnerable citizens. As the winter of 1892 dragged on, the Russian government faced growing criticism for its handling of the famine. In March 1892, a group of Duma deputies, led by the fiery orator Pavel Milyukov, launched a scathing attack on the government's relief efforts, demanding greater action to alleviate the suffering of the peasantry. The debate marked a turning point in the crisis, as the Russian government was finally forced to confront the scale of its failure and take more decisive action to address the famine. As the winter of 1892 dragged on, the Russian government finally began to take more decisive action to address the famine. In April 1892, a new relief committee was established, headed by the Grand Duke Nicholas, who would later become the Tsar of Russia. The committee worked tirelessly to distribute aid to the affected regions. And slowly but surely, the situation began to improve. The number of deaths from starvation and related diseases began to decline, and the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg were no longer filled with beggars. However, the legacy of the famine would be felt for years to come. The Russian economy was severely impacted, and the government's handling of the crisis had eroded trust in the monarchy. The famine also had a profound impact on Russian society, leading to increased discontent among the population and a growing sense of disillusionment with the government. As the Russian historian Richard Pipes would later write, the famine of 1891–92 was a watershed event in Russian history, marking the beginning of the end of the old regime. In the years that followed, the Russian government implemented various reforms aimed at preventing similar disasters from occurring in the future. These included improvements to the country's transportation infrastructure, the establishment of a national system for collecting and distributing grain, and the creation of a network of relief organizations to provide aid to those affected by natural disasters. Despite these efforts, the memory of the famine would continue to haunt Russia for generations to come. The event was seen as a symbol of the government's callousness and incompetence, and it would be invoked by revolutionaries and critics of the monarchy in the years leading up to the Russian Revolution. As the Russian writer Maxim Gorky would later write, "The famine was a terrible lesson, one that taught us that the old regime was incapable of protecting its own people, and that a new era of freedom and justice was needed." Today, the Russian famine of 1891–92 is remembered as one of the most devastating humanitarian disasters in modern history. It is seen as a testament to the importance of effective governance and the need for governments to prioritize the welfare of their citizens. The event has also been recognized as a major turning point in Russian history, marking the beginning of the end of the old regime and paving the way for the revolutions that would shape the course of the 20th century. The Russian famine of 1891–92 serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of neglect and incompetence, and it underscores the need for governments to prioritize the needs of their citizens above all else. As the Russian historian Orlando Figes has written, the famine was a stark reminder that the welfare of the people is the ultimate test of a government's legitimacy, and that those who fail to provide for their citizens will ultimately be held accountable. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.